My name's Simon Goddard, and I lead an organisation called Rivertree, which I'm going to tell you a little bit more about later. But just over 10 years ago, when I was a minister of Load Chapel, a small rural congregation just outside Cambridge, I put up on the screen a picture of a crossroads, because over a series of church meetings, we as a church community were going to make an important decision. We were going to choose between two paths, a path of familiarity and comfort, or a path of obedience and faithfulness into the unknown, into a place that God was calling us. Over the previous few years, we'd started a fresh expression of church one Sunday each month, a family-friendly cafe, kids' church type activity that it had enabled us to engage with a number of new families where people were engaging with the gospel and on journeys of faith. And the church had cancelled one of their Sunday morning services in the chapel in order to resource that fresh expression of church. But now we faced a significant decision. As leaders, we felt God was calling us to move all of our Sunday morning services into that space, the school in the village down the road. Interestingly, though, the next year, 2010, was going to be our bicentenary, 200 years since the chapel was founded. And we were suggesting to the church that our celebration of that 200 years should be marked by us leaving the building on a Sunday morning. An interesting series of meetings. People were grieved by the possibility of leaving their chapel. One person in tears as she spoke. But over those series of meetings, over a number of weeks, something remarkable, something miraculous happened. People came to a point where unanimously at the end of those meetings, we were able to vote that we were going to leave the building and set up each Sunday at the school. It was amazing. People said, it's not what I want, but it's clear that this is what God wants. A remarkable moment in the journey of that church. It's a remarkable moment in the journey of any church when we realize that at the heart of our faith is the death and resurrection of Jesus. John 12:24 says, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains a single seed. But if it does fall to the ground and die, it becomes a harvest of 30, 60, or 100-fold. The path of faithfulness is one that needs us to embrace death. It's a path that enables us through death to find life. In Jeremiah 6, we read a warning to the people of Jerusalem, the people of Israel. Yes, we get to verse 16, where we're encouraged to take the path, the ancient path, the good path. But this verse 16 is set in the context of a warning to the people of Jerusalem about their behavior, about the way they had acted, the way that they showed little fruit. In verse 9, we read of the possibility of the enemies of Israel's coming upon them and gleaning whatever remnant may remain on them, like one who gleans from the vine. And I believe that warning could be one that is being spoken over the church today. In this COVID season, where the church is challenged, where the church is facing a number of difficulties and challenges, we also face a missional opportunity. We also face a choice of which path we are going to take. Do we take the comfortable and familiar path, or do we take the path that takes us down a road that we're yet to understand or see fully? Do we take the path of faithfulness? In Hebrews 12, we read of God's people, the ancients, who are commended for their faithfulness. When I was a regional minister, some people in churches would say to me, at least we're being faithful. The church in this nation is in a context of decline. In 1979, 12% of the population on any given Sunday would find themselves in church. That figure today is less than 6%. And if you look at people in their 20s, that figure is 3% or less. I believe just as Jerusalem faced the words of the prophet warning them about the place where they were in their relationship with God. I believe that warning is one perhaps we need to hear as church. Each generation receives from the generation previous to it something to hand on to the next generation. And this generation is, in a number of ways, unique. In terms of the economy, we heard even before COVID that the state of the economy, both in our wealth as a nation and in our equality, is worse than it's been for previous generations. Children are going to struggle to buy their own homes. Inequality hinders our flourishing as a nation. The previous generation is handing less on to the next generation. But the same is true also of the planet. Previous generations have inherited an earth, and this generation is passing to its children a planet which is in a worse state than they received it in. Young people are despairing at what we have done to this planet. But what about the church? I believe this generation is also handing the church in a poorer state to the next generation. This warning that Jeremiah offered to the people of Jerusalem is a warning for us as a church. Have we held church for ourselves? Have we made the path one of familiarity and comfort rather than of faithfulness and fruitfulness? I believe that the path of faithfulness always leads to the destination of fruitfulness. That if we are being faithful, it says in John 15, verse 16, that I've appointed you for fruitfulness. I have chosen you for that purpose. And it says, if you abide in me, if you live in me and in my will for you, you will be fruitful. It says that in John 15. And I believe always the path of faithfulness leads to fruit. I believe the church is being challenged now about what it does moving forward. Is it going to be a generation that hands the vine on in an almost barren state? Or is it going to be a generation in the church that allows God to prune it in order that the next generation would be fruitful? In the past, there have been seasons of renewal in the church. The ministry of Wesley and Whitfield, people like St. Francis, who particularly inspires me, the ministry of the Clapham sect. At times in our history, people have looked at the state of the church and rather than just praying for revival, and yes, let us pray for revival, but rather than just praying for revival, they have understood that renewal is necessary. These renewal movements in the church have embraced the new thing that God is doing, have understood what God is asking of them in their generation, and have acted in obedience. So the question is, what will the legacy be of the generation in church at the moment? This COVID season gives us an opportunity to pause, to reset, to ask the question, what does God want of us moving forward, and to respond to it. Is this going to be a season where we allow God to prune in order that the legacy of this generation is going to be one of fruitfulness for generations to come? I mentioned Rivertree, which is the organisation I set up when I left regional ministry a couple of years ago. I left it in my own journey of faithfulness, my own path of obedience. In order to fulfill the calling upon my life, I felt I needed to leave regional ministry and set up Rivertree. And I'm going to tell you a bit more about it. But one of the things that I'm being inspired to do at the moment through Rivertree is to invite collaboration around a new form of church. Transform.church seeks to nurture and cultivate relationships in 4 dimensions. And I think each of these 4 dimensions is vital for the church moving forward in this generation. The first is, of course, our relationship with God. The spiritual dimension is of ultimate importance. Is this going to be a generation that takes seriously its relationship with God, its obedience to the call of God, its confidence in the gospel, and its sharing of what we've got, what we have found in the person of Jesus? We need to be a church that takes seriously that relationship, that dimension, and finds fruitfulness in that. But we also need to be a generation that engages and develops our relationship with others. So often, church focuses on one of these dimensions and ignores the rest. We need to look at the issues of injustice in our world. We need to be engaging in our communities, bearing their pain, and then through the gift of the Holy Spirit, dreaming with them about what could be possible when God's kingdom comes amongst them. We need to be people who engage socially, who have a voice in the public square, addressing the issues of our age and being active in them. We also need to develop a third relationship with the natural world, with God's creation, with stuff. In previous generations, we have embraced the lie that our wealth is found in things, that our satisfaction is found through consuming. That isn't the case. We need to be a generation that takes seriously our relationship with the world, takes seriously the issues of climate change, takes seriously the challenge to live simply, to value the things which money can't buy: peace and hope and covenant and joy. We need to be people who take seriously our relationship with the created world, who engage and lead in a movement that seeks to protect and hand on in a better manner than we are at the moment this planet that we have been given. And a fourth relationship, I think, is vital as well: to see transformation in the inner person, to be committed to personal growth, personal discipleship, to fruitfulness in our character and courage in our calling. Each of us asking that question of what God requires of us, and then boldly going in that direction, trusting in God. We're called to be a church of transformation, seeing people's relationships with God transformed, relationships with one another transformed, relationship with this world transformed, relationships with ourselves and the calling upon our lives transformed. If that inspires you, I'm keen to talk to you and to collaborate with you in transform.church. River Tree seeks to catalyse and to cultivate and to collaborate. Over the last 2 years, a team is growing of contractors and collaborators that work with me to enable others to fulfil God's calling on their lives, to fulfill individual and organisational callings, to be obedient to God. We've collaborated in a number of ways with Fresh Expressions, where we provide resourcing for those who are seeking to start new expressions of church. Download the Godsend app, which is just one of the resources that we've been instrumental in providing. Look up FX Godsend in the App Store or Google Play. We've also been collaborating with Baptist Together. I'm one of the 3 pioneer ambassadors alongside Roy Searle and Ali Bolton, but I've also been involved in a project called Missional Adventure, compiling 100 stories seeking to inspire others to engage on the adventure that God has in store for them. And we're currently talking with Baptist Together about collaborating on a new project, embracing the Kickstart missional opportunity that the government is funding in terms of a new generation employability skills. But this is an opportunity for churches to invest in the lives of young people. We're collaborating with others. I collaborate with the Eastern Baptist Association, enabling mission in the east of England. I collaborate with the Light College. Through River Tree, we were part of the Hope Bringers course, seeking to encourage people to creatively share the gospel. Collaborating with dioceses particularly in Ipswich at the moment, and with individual churches, Baptist churches, journeying with them to explore what God is calling them to be and to become in terms of missional engagement. Also collaborated recently with the Transforming Shame Group to offer a conference attended by more than 100 people on shame and the gospel. And finally, we're exploring a collaboration with Fresh Streams about offering training in 5Q, and hopefully you'll hear about that elsewhere in this conference. We seek to catalyze, we seek to initiate and sow seeds of innovation across the church, encouraging new things to emerge. We seek to cultivate. We're passionate about pursuing fruitfulness for individuals and organizations to become all they were created to be. And we realize that none of that is possible without collaboration, working together for the sake of the gospel. I'd love for you to be one of those who take the ancient path, that path that the ancients were commended for, that path of faithfulness. Because that path of faithfulness is a path that leads to fruitfulness, into the place that God has prepared for us, into that place that God has in store for us, that place of obedience for this generation, for this time, a path of life and legacy, a path of faithfulness and fruitfulness. I pray that you too might find that ancient path, one of fruitfulness and joy. Amen.
Some brief introductions then. So Graham and then Jim, Ed.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Graham. I lead the church, Red Hill Baptist Church up in Surrey, and I've been here about 3 years. And I think my reason for joining this group is just I've got no desire to go back to how we were doing church before lockdown, but I'm struggling with an increased pressure of nostalgia to go back to how things were. And I just found Simon's video really inspiring, actually. So I thought I'd come and talk more about it.
That's great.
Jim,
yeah,
and then Ed.
Oh, hello everyone. I'm from Dorchester, and I think I'm the most southerly attendee, it seems. When I've gone to the Goddard meetings, everyone else is from further up. But yeah, I came along with primarily to find out more, because there are I've become very good friends with a chap who's involved with Pioneer Ministry in Dorchester, and who's a member at our church, and he's partly employed by the church as well, so I work alongside him. And I thought I want to get my finger very, very firmly on the pulse of what's going on and see if I can hook him up with some of the great resources that are coming. And the second reason is because I'm mates with Simon and I missed him, and I wanted to see him and show him my beard.
And I'm very impressed.
It's a good beard. Good beard.
Modelled on his.
I was going to say imitation is the best form of flattery, isn't it?
Yeah. That's just what I wanted to do. I thought about starting my own organisation, calling it Pond Bush, but I decided not to bother. I thought, no, I'll just come along and say hello. The beard will have to suffice.
Ed, swiftly moving on.
Yeah, swiftly moving on. I'm trying to grow my beard to be a bit more like Simon, but I'm a little bit behind you, Jim. Yeah, so I'm Ed Green. I'm the associate leader at Hall Baptist Church here in Chester, and I lead a missional community on a big housing estate just on the edge of the city, and I love mission and anything to do with that. And so, yeah, Simon's stuff is always interesting and intriguing and worth listening to. And yeah, that's kind of my heart is mission, evangelism, reaching the lost and the least, and that's kind of a key part of us as a church as well. So yeah, good to meet you all as well.
Great. Nick, Daryl and Alison and
Ken.
Hi. So Nick, introduce yourself, then Daryl and Alison, just briefly as we begin our conversation. Hopefully.
Yeah, I am operations manager for a church up on Teesside, Stockton Baptist Church. Our story sounds very much like Graham's, and we have someone very much like Ed, and so we've got that bit of nostalgia, bit of inertia, and a bit of kind of, we've got all of these things going on, and so I'm here just to try and listen to how Ed's doing it, how Graham's dealing with stuff, and see what I can take away, hoping to see if we can have, we want both at the same time.
Yeah.
And we want both to be kind of, to be running in harmony. But it's just how do we get to that point?
Yeah, that's really good.
Daryl, and then Alison and Ken.
Yeah, I'm senior pastor of Kilmington Baptist Church. I've been saying for a few years now that I think we're part of a dying breed. A full-time paid pastor, we've actually got two in a church, but church life is changing, and I think this has fast-forwarded everything that's happening, and I'm keen to sort of reimagine what church is going to look like, and that could mean some harsh changes for us as leaders. But I think I'm open to that, and it's interesting to hear about mega churches going into meltdown. Well, yeah, that could well be just one of the casualties, and for sure many others.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl, and then Alison and Ken, and hopefully we're all here, introduced ourselves for a conversation.
We're Alison and Ken Dyer from Grantham in Lincolnshire. Been at the church 33 years, but we're open to leaving. The church has left the building.
Yeah. So there was a vision from the church for quite a couple of years. We kept saying to be outside the walls, to go outside the walls. So we set up, it's a long story really, but we set up a new group called MI6. It's missionally intention with 6 values. And it's missionally intentional to get us outside the building, to build people up enough to share their testimonies better and do something new. And we're looking for a new way forward as leaders of the church, and looking for fresh ways of doing it. Great.
Well, let me share a few ideas, and then we can sort of begin a conversation. So, I mean, I didn't talk a lot about it in the video, but I am one of the pioneer ambassadors, and for me, the definition of pioneering is about going to where people are at and seeing church emerge there. In Fresh Expressions, we have this journey which starts with listening. So what's God saying? What are we hearing in the community that we're seeking to engage with and connect with? How can we love and serve and enable love and service to take place? Sometimes we need to be the guest as well as the host, not just do all of the serving, but invite people into a place where they can serve one another. So listening, loving and serving, building community, developing relationship and what have you. And actually those three, the first half of the circle, first half of that journey, a lot of churches do in their, coffee mornings or toddler groups or whatever, community needs this, we start to love and provide it, and then community builds. But quite often the traditional model is to say, okay, now we've built relationships, the next thing to do is to invite people to church. And the pioneering journey says, actually, no, what we want to do is do discipleship here in this context, and then see church or some form of congregation emerge in this context. And then often what happens is the process is repeated. People say, so conversation with a sports chaplain recently was saying, sort of had his mind blown, that metanoia that Alan was talking about last night. So you're saying that if I gather some people, we go for a run and then for a coffee afterwards, that can be church. If we open the Bible, and that sense that, what does it look like to do church, or to do church in a way that's relevant to the context? So pioneering explores that journey. That journey is in a number of places. You can find it. There's an app called Godsend, which I advertised in the video, FX Godsend, free app, and that takes you through that journey. So for me, that's pioneering is about contextually relevant mission, about planting the gospel and seeing what form of church emerges, rather than planting churches that we know what they look like. Now, different churches in that journey. So I work ecumenically, and some denominations have struggled for a variety of reasons. Anglican churches have struggled because if you start a new church or something that is becoming church, a mature expression of church, then you end up having to celebrate the sacraments, and you need a priest in order to celebrate the sacraments. for Baptists, and everyone here is a Baptist, I think, yeah. Yeah. So, ish. Anyway, but for Baptists, our particular problem is constitution, is membership. What does it mean for this to be a church? And we. So in my mind, as Baptists, we need to get our head around what it looks like to be a church with more than one congregation, and to be multi-congregational. Now that can look different. So we already have multi-congregational churches that might have often the bigger churches that have a 9 o'clock relatively traditional service, at 11 o'clock sort of more family-focused service, a 7 o'clock youth service. They might meet all in the same space, and they may have the same similar message, but we already have in our head it's possible to be a multi-congregational type of Baptist church. But there are different types of models. So Ed's at Hull, and they've adopted a missional communities model. I think there are other potential models where you have tell me if I'm wrong, Ed, but there's a sense of a hub that Nigel was talking about, a place of celebration. So 3 functions of church: celebration, discipleship, and mission. And celebration takes place all together, but discipleship and mission very much sit in sort of the missional communities or the dispersed congregations or clusters or whatever people call them. And there might be other models where you have a number of smaller congregations that operate on a brother sister model. So there is a sense of partnership together. There isn't a hub, but they might work together for shared leadership. Now, a number of these people are exploring different models, but as I say, as Baptists, we need to get our head around that. And my own journey when I was at Renew was one where we ended up having a Fresh Expression Sunday once a month. We then moved out of the chapel on a Sunday morning, and so we had 3 Sundays a month that were a normal contemporary type service and the Fresh Expression once a month. And then we had a fortnightly evening traditional hymn prayer sandwich, which started to grow because we knew what we were doing, and there were people that wanted that, and we started to reconnect with people who had sort of stopped going to church a number of years ago. And when I came to the church and said, some of these people who are coming regularly on a Sunday evening, because it was easier to start there than the Fresh Expression, some of the people who are coming to that are expressing an interest in membership to become part of the church. What do they need to do? And the answer I got was, come on a Sunday morning. And we just struggled to get our head around what that is. So multi-congregational churches, I think, is a conversation that we need to have. And so there's 2 things. One is the management function of church. I don't like that word, but there are practical things that we need to do. And being a charity and having governance of that charity takes up the capacity of a certain amount. And if you're a small group, that capacity, you don't want all of that capacity going into management, into governance. You want as much capacity released into mission. So I think there is some, what's the word? Economies of scale if you've got one church with many congregations. And Graham was talking before about a desire to transition the church, a desire to do something new in a new way. And I would say, and I'll leave it here and we can have a conversation. I would say that part of what I learned, but it's really hard to transition a congregation, really hard to take a congregation all the way to a place where it becomes accessible and relevant to people, because you'll get halfway and people will feel that they've moved enough, but you haven't moved enough for the people that you're trying to come. And so transitioning a congregation is a struggle. So I would suggest what you need to do is to start something alongside. I like the conversation, the MI6 sounds great, that the Dyers talked about, that actually starting something alongside what exists, investing in a small group of people who get it or start to get it and want to explore, that then helps the rest of the church to see what it looks like. And it's easier to catch something than it is to be taught something. So a number of things I've thrown out there, but come back at me or ask some questions, or let's begin a conversation.
Just if I can just pick up on that last thing then, Sam, that's really interesting. That was going to be my first question, was, is this something you can see working in a sort of inherited church setup. Because in my last church, the experience was something of that you get to a certain point and then it's too big a beast to change, you know. But
the experience of, I think he's just gone. He's going to back in a minute. Experience at Hall and another church in Ipswich, Burlington, that have gone down the missional communities model. They have both had leaders who have been there for 20 years. And they've transitioned a church over by loving that church over the long haul, and both of those churches also have been in the metrics that we usually use, successful churches. They've had great worship opportunities, experience. They've had full buildings, it's growing in numbers. But both churches, both leaders came to the point of saying we're not seeing enough conversion growth in what we're doing. We're seeing people come to the church, often from other churches who are attracted by what we're doing, and the leaders have built up enough capital with their congregations to take them on a journey to this new place. The journey didn't finish. I mean, we ended up growing. We ended up moving all of our services to the school. We saw baptisms, but when I left, the church reverted to it was right for me to move on into regional ministry, but it was also a loss to the church. They weren't going to keep moving in that model, and I think there's a long haul to bring about that change. But my reflection on what I did was I perhaps could have done something alongside what we were doing, rather than and invest in the few and experiment, because the whole church did an experiment when we cancelled one of our Sunday morning services and did something at the school. I mean, we were a small church, and in terms of resources and what we were doing, we needed that. But actually, if the experiment hadn't worked, it did. But if it hadn't, that would have been a significant setback for the missional journey of the church. And I think setting a few people up, journeying with them, encouraging them, investing in them is probably, on my reflection, the better way to do it. If you, and then to help people see it. And you're going to come back on that, Graham, or you?
Yeah, I think I'm just reflecting on a few themes that have come out, and one is just the challenge of the governance of the big church. You know, it does seem to be quite all-encompassing at the moment, and again, you know, you mentioned sort of getting that balance in, that it's not just all governance and running the charity sort of thing. And I guess one thing I picked up with Andy's session yesterday was, you know, on huddling with your leaders first of all and getting them on board. And I guess where I'm feeling a challenge is just it sounds like what you're saying is this is quite long-term commitment that's needed to see big change happen. Would that be right?
Yeah, I think so. I think you can see some change in a short amount of time, but I remember, I mean, you know, the changing the default mode of a church is really difficult, and you can make behavioral change and people can start doing things differently because you're leading them. But if you were taken out of the picture, the question is has a default mode changed? And you know, it does take a long time to change that default mode of the whole church. You might change the mindset and practice of a few people who are sort of the early adopters, but in order to get the whole church on board, that does take time as different people get it and come on board with what you're doing. I think it's good to have a conversation with the church and to try and release some of your capacity as a leader to do that, so that the church isn't, so what you're not asking for is the church to do anything differently from, you know, there's a sense in which let's work out how we can keep doing what we're doing, but let's release some resources, let's give some permission for a group within the church to explore this, to experiment, to to do something different. And you know, that might mean you inviting not being in the pulpit so much as for the inherited models of church, and you know, giving people the opportunity so that you've got more time to focus on the discipleship of leaders and the community contacts and all of that. But yeah, I think it is a long journey, I would say.
We found this is in microcosm because it's much more set in the context of a church adjustment rather than actually a fresh expression of how we do things. But we wanted to put in Norwich, when I was minister there for 10 years, we wanted to do an evening service that was much more worship focused, and we thought it would be attractive for younger people to come along and be a part of it. And so we had an incredibly archaic and traditional morning service, which was very popular. And we started off with a really, we tried to make it look like a concert. You know, we had all sorts of things. We blacked out the entire hall. We had light displays and all sorts of fancy things. And then after 7 years, there was a really vehement complaint made from the group that were right at the heart of that. And they just kind of said, there's no difference between the morning and the evening now. It's kind of that we've fallen into a rut in the evening. One of the leaders just said, no, that the morning has completely changed. It's the morning now bears no resemblance to what it used to be. And in fact, it's caught up with the evening, and it took about a 7-year period for that to filter down, that there was, a new eloquence in worship, and that fresh understanding that's so important, you know, that worship is more than the a little bit of sort of filler between the important bits, but is an end to itself. So 7 years, it's a depressing thought, isn't it, that it takes that amount of time. But I mean, I guess it's a similar principle. This was just a minor internal thing, not actually going out and doing amazing stuff like you guys are talking about.
That's why I wonder whether lockdown could provide us the fast track to introduce change. I think on reflection, I'm grateful for lockdown. It's exposed a lot of weaknesses in the church. You know, one of the conversations we're having in leadership now is worship. Actually, we've just got a church full of it's a spiritual creche. They're very young, immature Christians who can barely feed themselves, and we're just doling out the food. And maybe this is a chance to say, hands up, we've got it wrong. Now let's get serious about what church will look like from here on.
Yeah, and I think I wrote an article in Ascension last year where I think I stopped short from using this phrase, but I'll say it here about the codependency that we have in churches. As ministers, we like to be the person that is turned to for the word, for the pastoral care, and we create a situation in church where people depend on us and we depend on them as ministers. And I think as Baptists, we believe in the priesthood of all believers, and I think the opportunity for me, Fresh Expressions, missional communities, whatever they are, is about equipping people in the mission of God where they are, and sort of saying, actually, my job is to equip the saints and to, in essence, I mean, it doesn't ever get there, but in essence, to do myself out of a job as a minister. So, and we often see discipleship in a university degree rather than a vocational qualification type of way. We just need to give people enough knowledge about the Bible and everything's fine. But actually, you don't teach someone to be a plumber without them ever giving them a wrench and a bit of pipe. And I think the best place for discipleship is on mission. And you know, this approach, you know, sending people off to start, whether it's congregations or missional communities, whatever language you use, to gather people and to share faith and develop community and read the Bible and grow as followers of Jesus, to do that for themselves, equipped by you as a leader, fits very much with our ecclesiology, I think. But yeah, we have become quite clergy dependent, I would say, as Baptists.
I think there's something significant in remembering as well of the impact that we have in the now. So there's a danger in this conversation of thinking, oh, it's going to take 7, 10, 20 years. But actually, doing something now impacts lives now. And that's the thing that's been coming to mind, is that, you know, it's easy that it feels easy to go, well, that sounds like hard work. So it's easier to carry on what we're doing. But actually, there are lives that, you know, even if it takes a long time, or even if we go and it hasn't caught on with the wider church, actually we've still impacted lives day by day, week by week, as we've done these other things. And I just sense that's an important thing I need to remind myself of, so perhaps others of you do.
Yeah. And journeying as ministers with intention as well. I think it's easy to drift. I think this year COVID has given us an opportunity. We've all had to think differently. And it's very easy to drift through our ministry, and if things are ticking over, and it's easy not to think too much about having to do things differently. But I think there is a being intentional. They talk about 1 degree changes and the impact that can have over the long term, but actually, like you say, you need to be intentional about that now to start taking that journey.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go on, Nigel.
No, I was just going to say, I spent some time with Carl Martin doing a bit of training in Edinburgh Central Church, and one of the key things there was find the pioneers. And almost if you can find those people who are saying, who are clearly have a divine dissatisfaction with the Sunday morning thing, and starting to journey with them and starting to invest in them, through them, to make those things happen. I just have a sense, and since being here, it's been trying to pinpoint and spot those people and begin to invest in them in a way that, because actually those people will, once, as you said before, seeing it and experiencing it from others in the church is more likely to cause them to look at it than us saying, come and have a look at this thing over here.
And Rich Robinson has worked with Carl as well, and the whole APES stuff. I mean, so it was mentioned last night after Alan's talk that there's a group of us going through a cohort of 5Q training. So 5Q is the APES sort of quotient, and developing awareness of that. And I think the whole APES learning is something that speaks into this, because he talked about the generative and the sustaining. So the sustaining, the shepherd and the teacher are really important, but what we've lacked is the energy and investment in the apostles, the prophets, and the evangelists, or the apostolic and the prophetic and the evangelistic. And I think, looking for those people who can, if you are a shepherd and a teacher, can be quite frustrating and annoying sometimes, because they're always saying we're not getting out enough, or we're not moving forward fast enough, or what have you. But actually bringing those into leadership and hearing their voices is really important. Ed, you were going to say something, I think. Sorry.
Can't remember what, but it's probably really profound and meaningful.
We've all missed it. Sorry.
Oh, never mind. No, I was just going to say, I love the fact that these questions are being asked in the conversations, because as somebody who's in a church where we've been wrestling with these conversations, and we've kind of gone through some of that stuff, that actually there's a real wisdom in going slow with a lot of these things when you're trying to change a big organization. I know, like, maybe lockdown is a catalyst moment where things can be accelerated perhaps, but at the same time, it's I guess trying to have that balance as well, and wisdom in it all. We've seen churches that have gone for the missional community model, Baptist churches, Church of England churches that have, changed overnight and the church has fallen apart. And then there's others perhaps that have gone too slowly and, just felt like you're dragging your feet or whatever. So there's a healthy balance and wisdom in taking your time. We certainly took about 5 years to kind of teach on culture and discipleship and raising that as an issue before we even mentioned missional communities. We actually started a missional community, the one that I lead, very much under the radar for the first kind of year and a half, 18 months to 2 years even. Just started plugging away, and then just started gently just sharing some of the success stories and just the kind of, but not even the success stories, just what we're doing. Just kind of, hey, this is what we've been up to on the estate with people. And that just kind of sparked imagination in a few. And you always get those early adopters, and you get people who just, freak out at any sense of change. There's a range of people in the middle of that. But I think finding the pioneers is important. And even if it's just one pioneer or a couple of people that you can just say, hey, yeah, let's go, have a little go, but maybe just do it under the radar, do it subtly, do it gently, do it quietly. and then just start telling the stories. And one of the big things about the missional community stuff is just telling the stories, and it's not just missional communities, it works in it anyway. Missional communities is just one vehicle. I think Simon's right in saying there's lots of different ways of doing this. This just is what we kind of chucked in with, and it works for us. But at the same time as that, we do messy church and a whole bunch of other different things as well. So yeah, there's not one way of doing it. Go on, Simon.
I'm going to say, I mean, if it'd be helpful, just a brief outline, because you cancel a couple of, well, I mean, pre-COVID, let's talk about pre-COVID, but
Yeah.
you had about 2 gatherings, celebrations a month, and the other Sundays were clear in order for people to invest in those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it kind of started as a forced change, but we kind of took it as a moment that we thought, we'll step into this. So basically what happened was we got kicked out of the building that we were using, which was very irritating for Sunday gatherings. And so we needed to find somewhere else. And then we ended up at the university, one of the university campuses in Chester, and it was quite expensive and it just wasn't a great venue. So we said, well, why don't we'd be talking about discipleship and missional communities. Why don't we just do 2 Sundays where we gather in this not brilliant building, but it will do. And then the 2 Sundays either side of those other Sundays, we'll send people out to have a go at missional communities. And that's kind of how we ended up launching the whole missional community stuff. But that was 5 years of teaching and going slowly to, teach culture and stuff. So, but then largely we've kept with that model for the last 7 years or so, like that, something like that, where we meet we used to meet first Sunday and third Sunday, and then the other 2 Sundays we released people to go and do missional communities, whatever that might look like. So on the second Sunday in this building where I am, we would have a messy church that meets here in the building, reaching families in the local community to where we are. But then other missional communities will be out doing their own thing. And I think somebody mentioned at the beginning, maybe before some of you arrived, but having a balance of up in and out, so trying to build in that rhythm into our mission as well, into our missional communities. So there'll be seasons where actually it's a season that we need to do a bit more of the focusing on our relationship with God or with each other or whatever that might look like. And then the kind of out focus, summer's a perfect time to kind of go, let's do some real mission stuff. Let's get out in the community. The weather's better. We can have barbecues, all that kind of stuff. So trying to build in some of those rhythms into our missional lives as well. So yeah, that's kind of how we got to that point of launching missional communities. And then we kind of, largely have stayed with that. When there's a 5th Sunday, we do gather for a 5th Sunday. We usually do like a special celebration and maybe invite a guest speaker in or something like that to kind of encourage us. And largely, some of the church did struggle at the beginning, but we didn't really lose too many members. We lost a few, and they were probably right that they went. It was probably time for them to move on, and some of them were annoying, so I was pleased to see them go. But then, I didn't perhaps have the invested relationship as others in the church. But anyway, there's some people you're like, yeah, it's definitely God is calling you somewhere else. But yeah, largely the church stuck together and has grown as a result of that. And we've seen people come to faith, and we've baptized lots of people over the last year before COVID struck. But even in post-COVID, we're still trying to connect with people out in the community in different ways. So God has been good, and it's exciting, with its struggles too.
I just ask Ed, what defines a missional community?
Well, that's a good question, Graham. So missional community is basically where you've got a group of, it's difficult to say numbers really, because numbers isn't so much the important thing, but where you've got a group of people who are fixed around a common vision to reach out to people in their either community or their network or whatever that might be. And yeah, so that can be, usually it's probably more than 4 or 5 people. You want to kind of think of it as having a community, but yeah. And then, so in terms of people, it's a bunch of people that want to go and reach people, and it has to be outward looking to be a missional community, because otherwise it's not missional, is it? It's just a nice holy huddle.
There's a helpful phrase, which is it's a small group that exists for a purpose outside of itself.
Yeah, that's a good
Which is almost all our church small groups exist for the people in the group, and even if you start them not doing that, they always end up falling back into up and in.
Yeah.
And so what I love about missional communities is that their purpose, and they know when they join, the reason they're joining is not to just look after one another and have a nice time. It's to achieve something over there or amongst us that we're going to do. I find that really encouraging, but it's difficult to, you've got to find what those things are, and you've got to find people who've got the heart and the passion for those things that that you want them to seek after, I guess.
Yeah, and the community aspect of it is important too. So there does have to be that caring for each other. There has to be genuine care. There needs to be, there's the classic kind of home group stuff, Bible studies and teaching, but actually everything is framed in that kind of missional lens. So the Bible study is actually, well, how do we grow as disciples of Jesus? And then how do we then share this with other people outside of the group, outside of the church? So there's always that kind of trying to see it through that missional lens, which I would argue is how we should be living the Christian life anyway. But then that's because I'm sold out on this stuff.
Ken, go for it.
Can I ask, when you get new Christians who wouldn't naturally go into a church situation, right? No, you don't put them in it. You make what do you do with them?
You have missional groups, or you might have a group of like the cafe.
Yeah, so Fresh Expressions would say you would do church in a way that's relevant for them, that you would grow a congregation in a way that's relevant. So I'm just trying to think of examples. There's a church, an Anglican church down in Benfleet that they connected with young people. Young people said they didn't have anywhere to skateboard. They ended up, it turned out into a £500,000 project where they built an indoor skateboard set up with a cafe next to it. And that was the place where they had their congregation. The young people used that space, they made relationships, and then on a Sunday afternoon, they used to gather the young people there. So you weren't trying to get them into an existing church. No, you were trying to, and so, but as people journey in a missional community model, often people will connect first with the missional community, and over time may feel more comfortable joining a celebration. And there is a bit of a journey there when worship is, as it were, taken out of the missional community and put into the hub congregation.
It's funny actually, in our missional community, we've not often invited people to church very early on in their kind of journey. We've just said, come and hang out at our house, have a coffee, come for lunch once a month. And we've done some Bible study stuff as well, and just said, hey, we're going to be exploring this. Do you want to come along? It's very much relational. There's a lot of it's around the school playground with our kids because of the age that they are. But then actually what we found is we've said, we're not on next Sunday because some of us will be going to our church celebration service over the other side of the city. And actually some people was then kind of just inquisitive. What's that? What's it you go to? Can I come? So we're like, yeah, if you want, just come along with no expectation. And then we've had a few people really just stick out and stick in it and stay and get baptized and become part of the kind of bigger gathering, and then others that haven't. So there's no kind of expectation that they have to come to our church service. If they want to, and if they're intrigued, then they come along. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixture of whether people do or not.
Yeah, I think one of the real challenges is that the church still sees Sunday morning as what a Christian looks like. So therefore, the only way we've impacted someone is if they come on a Sunday. I remember doing a youth drop-in at church I was in Hampshire, and saying, if someone from church would say, how's it going? It's going really well. We've not seen any of them come on a Sunday, have we? It's like, they're not going to come near what we do on a Sunday. And they'd be completely alien to it and not fitting at all. But there's still that understanding in churches. That's what a Christian looks like. A Christian is someone who comes at 10:30 and sits in the pews and sings and does those things. And so whatever else we're doing is the goal of that is to get them in here with us, sitting on our pews. And that's just really hard to change. Because that's our life. That's my life. That's what I've understood a Christian to be. That's how I've, journeyed through church. And so it is for everyone else. So they're thinking, why do they need something different? This worked for all of us. I think that's a real challenge.
Three things have come to my mind. One direct response to that is one of the things that, and rightly so, is pointed in the direction of pioneers, is because there isn't that intention to get people into church. Some pioneers have gone right the other way, and there's not even an intention necessarily to take people on a discipleship journey. There's very much justice, social engagement type mindset, and there are pioneers in our Baptist family who I struggle with their lack of intention in terms of developing Christian community, even if that community looks very different. So it isn't about getting people into church, but it still has to be about building nurturing Christian discipleship and community. The second thing that came to my mind was about the in, up and out and of. So in Fresh Expressions, we talk about the of, particularly if you're dealing with a multi-congregational approach. It's really important to work out that isn't you know, the of in a missional community approach is very much the hub celebration. That's that, or shared church socials or what have you. But you do need to be thinking of what's our ofness, what's our oneness as church. If we are all these quite, it's very easy to be quite consumeristic. If, you know, I'm going to the muddy church, and I'm just meeting with people like me who like to go for a walk, you know, in the Dales or whatever. Actually recognizing that you're one group of people within a church that's made up of all sorts of different type of people. That's really important. And the third thing that just came to my mind, sort of random thoughts, was this is about releasing people to pursue their passions. I think so often in church we, because of the governance function or the running of things, we draw people out of the things that they really love, whether that's, you know, kayaking along the river, whether that's crocheting or enjoying specialist coffee or what, do you know what I mean? People are people and they have these unique passions and things, and we extract people from that rather than saying, what would it look like to be a Christian, to make disciples alongside the other people that love classic cars? You know, how can we release you rather than busy you up in church to invest in relationships in that group of people? And I think that's a really important part of the journey as well.
Brilliant.
So, I mean, just in terms of, particularly one of I spend a lot of time I did until I moved house to March a few months ago, spent a lot of time with climate activists, was involved in XR and all of that, and was, you know, being able to have faith conversations in that group. And we've just moved house, and I'm looking again at climate, people who are interested in the environment and planting trees and you know, caring for the environment. There's a bit of land near where we're living that I've got my eyes on already to develop a community garden. And the whole idea of being, as a Christian, being a community organizer, people who get people together to do things. People are looking for that, but they often aren't the ones to instigate it. If Christians, we could be community organizers, getting people together to do things that they enjoy, and then being, you know, a Christian witness in the midst of that. And you know, I'm already looking for, I'm visualizing this fire pit in the middle of this community garden that we can sit and have deep conversations about God, you know, in the midst of. So yeah, that's it's not what my local church, I think, is. I'm not in leadership there, so I'm in relationship with them, asking for their, you know, for their interest and encouragement. But yeah, I'm getting on with that and hoping that they will be in relationship with me as I do it. But
I think it's important to be able to let people that have got that pioneering spirit, to let them have the space to go and do these things, rather than trying to prop up the existing thing as it is, you know, because I mean, for us personally, we've been involved with the worship for years and years, until God kind of like started to move us out from that role. But then we were still also
through the lockdown, really.
No, before that.
Right.
And before.
Carry on.
Yeah. So also, we were also doing.
oh,
Lost them.
yeah, they're frozen.
And you kind of think, I need now space to have months, even now we're doing Zooms, we still have to be there for its dysfunction, and we're saying now we need space, we need at least once a month out so we can go and do what we want to do, and to let people do that.
Yeah,
it's quite hard actually as a church
to let go. One degree change, and I think that's where we're trying to take the church. Most of our, with 110, 120 people, I would say most are above 70. No. A good 60% are above 70. We have 8-9 families, and very few in the middle, our age, in their 50s.
Yeah.
And
you know, the word that I used in the video was legacy, and I think that's a very powerful word to be using in churches like that. That what are we handing on to the next generation? And you know, can we? It's not that we're going to change everything for you, but how can you help us to invest in the future of the church? Not that those people aren't part of the present of the church, but what legacy are you leaving? So there's a story down in the southwest, and if if you contact Carl Smethurst or look on the Southwest Baptist Association website, you'll find a story down there. I'm trying to think of the name of the church, but it basically people gave their inheritance, what they were, they're of an age, 70s and 80s, and they put enough money aside as a group of older people, this one congregation, to appoint a pioneer to do something differently amongst them, really giving themselves away, that John 12:24, dying to self in order to bring life. And a really powerful story. And I think that the challenge of legacy is that, we've had this church, we've had the beauty of gathering together over all these years, but before we go, what can we do to release something new and for the future? And I think there's a real challenge in that word legacy. What are we leaving for future generations in terms of the church? So that's one thing I'd say. The other thing is the 1 degree changes, and just one example of this is I was at a church as a regional minister, and there was some volunteer cry at the beginning, at one of the services in the notices saying, we need more volunteers for youth club. And this guy came up to me afterwards. He said, I always feel guilty when they do that, because I really, crowd control on a Friday evening isn't my thing. I said, so what is your thing? And he said, oh, I love photography. I said, if there were 2 or 3 kids that also love photography, that came to that youth group, that, I'd love to be able to show them how to do this and that and the other, with the camera. And so often we don't enable people to serve in their shape. We have a shape that they need to fit. And I think that's one of the things, again, just recognizing people's passions. So even if you do things differently in the church, but based on people's passions rather than what you've always done, I think that's one step along the way that says who you are is important, and the passions and interests and the relationships that you have are part of the life of the church, not something that stops you getting in the way of serving the church.
Yeah, I think one of the things that encourages me to go after it is the fact that I know there are people in the church who are really dissatisfied with church as it is, but they're not the kind of people who are going to moan about it. We know the ones who are going to come and whinge and moan. So actually you don't know, and they've just got used to this, and they turn up on Sundays and they do this stuff. Coming here, I met a guy quite early on who'd stopped coming on a Sunday. His wife came and he kind of just said, I've heard everything. There's nothing. It's just the same. It's all the same. All the same stuff. And it was. And I had a picture. It's a bit like he's in the army, but he never got out of the classroom. All that ever happened was he went into the classroom. And they taught him about all the stuff and the weapons and all the things that he needed to know, but he never actually got anywhere to do that. And so that's the thing. One of the things that I feel actually there are people who've got a real heart for some of this stuff, but they don't know there's any opportunity to do it. So they just turn up, sit in a pew, sing, listen to a sermon, and go home. But inside them, in fact, probably everyone really, but inside them is more, and it's trying to. That's what one of the things that makes me think, okay, I've got to keep pursuing this, because there's people out there who are going to do great things if we can just find them and release them.
Yeah, and it's very easy to talk about the fresh and to in being enthusiastic about the new thing to people very quickly hear, or you're dissing what exists. And I would talk more about the fact that people do connect with church as it is, but currently only 6% of the population connect with church as it is. If we're going to reach the other 94%, we need to do church in different ways in order to connect with these different people, and to not dismiss what exists. And actually, the whole forgotten ways, the ancient past. Actually, people are rediscovering some ancient practices in the life of the church. It's not about throwing away everything from the life of the church. It's investing in and discovering things, that the treasures that are in the church heritage. But it is about using those in to connect with new people and doing what we need to do. Acts 15, the Jerusalem Council, they worked out what they needed to do to get things out of the way of new people coming into the body of Christ. What rules are we going to not put on the Gentiles that that exist on the Jews, in order to make it not make it difficult for people to come into the life of God's family. And I think that's what we need to be doing. James,
sorry, I was going to say, one of the things I was talking about this yesterday in another Zoom call that I was on. It was that there's a sense of a stirring of a passionate, kind of authentic following of Jesus that perhaps looks a bit different to what we've seen. So that fills me with excitement. I get really excited about that. And I think that's actually one of those things that people can catch that aren't followers of Jesus yet, when they see this kind of passionate authenticity in who we are, that it's not kind of Sunday centric stuff, but it's about the everyday kind of stuff, which then I think of, like, Simon with your fire pit, sitting around having a conversation, because there's something authentic in that, isn't it? It's part of, like, what you're doing and in that moment, and just being able to tell some of the stories and how your faith connects with you. People catch that and they see that, and I think that's different. And I think that also then sparks something within the church, within the body as well. So I get really excited by seeing that, just passionate, genuine authenticity that's not kind of trying to put on a show or a performance or anything else. It's about being ourselves, but being really passionate for Jesus and the good news. Yeah.
Anne Morrissey talks about apt liturgy and the ability to, in a moment, to identify that this is a moment where God might be revealed, and being able to articulate with language. As an Anglican, she might say liturgy, but being able to just say, there's something special about this moment. Let's pray. Let's, being able to bring God into the conversation. And I think it's at the moment we have a conversation that exists every Sunday that we're trying to get people into, and actually it's about taking that conversation into the world where people are talking about spiritual things, but being able to hear the Christian voice, to glimpse Jesus in the midst of those conversations, is what we bring to them, rather than trying to extract them from that and into the church.
It's funny, we've been experimenting as a family of, like, how do we do more of that, having conversations with our kids that aren't forced, like this is a moment where we're now going to talk. But a couple of moments have spring to mind of we went for a walk in a forest near where we live, called Delamere Forest, and to be honest, it was horrible. Not the forest is beautiful, the kids were horrible. I've got 4 of them, and the oldest one was particularly horrible. Anyway, as our walk was drawing to a close, we got near to where the car was, so my wife said, I'll snip to the car. And we'd taken some hot chocolate with us, but we'd left it in the car, so that when we got back to the car we'd have it. So she grabbed the hot chocolate, we just dived back into the forest, just sat on a hill, and we actually had hot chocolate and I think it was digestive biscuits, and we had communion doing that, which to some people might be sacrilege, I don't know, but it's the first time I've ever used hot chocolate and digestive biscuits for communion, I have to say. But we just had communion with our kids, and we said, we're going to talk about Jesus. And it was just this really beautiful moment. I was thinking then about, actually, how do we do some of that kind of authentic, just in the moment, spur of the moment stuff with our mission as well. Another one just comes to mind again with our kids was around a fire pit, Simon. Just about a week ago, I said to the kids, I was like, right, let's have a fire pit in the garden. It was blooming cold. It was like -1 or something like that. So we had the fire pit, and we just started reflecting on our Christmas holidays and kind of the break and stuff, and what we've been up to, and giving thanks to God. But again, it was just this natural moment where it wasn't a forced thing. It just kind of came out. And I think, again, it just kind of taught me something about, actually, how do we do this in the everyday discipleship stuff as well, where it's not a forced moment, right now we're going to talk about God, but it just becomes very natural. And so I think that's kind of one of the things we've been trying to go after, that natural being who we are, but similar to what you just said, recognizing there's a moment here. Actually, let's do something specific and intentional with this moment. They both turned out to be really good moments for us as a family. So I just want to see more of that in the kind of mission stuff as well.
Yeah.
I think, can I just sort of reflect, because I've found this conversation really interesting, and it's kind of taken me on a little bit of a journey that has been a bit unexpected in this last hour. And I think just what I'm sensing, what I'm reflecting back on, is that it's this sort of missional community, whatever you call it. It's about purposeful, proper relationships. And I think where I feel challenged by this is I've often approached my friendships and interests outside of church, and church is very all-consuming, so anything outside it, as a sort of project, and the only reason for that friendship is to bring them in to the church. And I think what I found frustrating is folks sense that that's not genuine. And but the relationships that are genuine, you know, the friendships that I'm building that are, I haven't got the stories, you know. And when I come to Sunday, I sort of think, oh, I can't tell that story because that's, you know, it's just me having a drink and a chat with someone, and it's personal and everything. But what's where I've journeyed in this hour, and I don't know if that's helpful to anyone, is that actually the real fruit of the genuine relationship is going to mature over time rather than as a soundbite on the Sunday. I think that's kind of, I found that really helpful listening to you guys, really helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Great, Graham, thank you. And I mean, I know when I became a care home chaplain, it's very easy as a minister to spend all your time with Christians, or like you say, just making sure that you get to this thing, because you got to have that, you've got to be talking about a friend that you're investing in order to not be a fraud at the front of church. And I found when I became a chaplain for, it was about 10-15 hours of my week, it was eye-opening. It was like, phew, so it's liberating. Actually, I'm now meeting normal people. Not that people in church weren't, but I mean, I know Jim has been a chaplain as well, and I think that and again, you're there as a minister, and it's not quite a friendship, but it does provide you with a space at the church. It gives you permission, and often as a minister, it's very difficult for the church to let you go. If you're not doing something that's inward focused, it's very hard to get that permission sometimes from some of our churches.
Just as a little reflection, I loved what you were saying, Ed, in follow-up to what Simon said about Jill Morrissey's comment, and it made me think of the book Anne Morrison, her as well.
Anne Morrissey.
Anne Morrissey, of course. How could I have missed Morrissey? He's one of my favourites. But in the book Gilead by somebody Robinson, I've forgotten her name now, which is very lovely. I'd recommend it to any of you. There's a marvelous moment where the church burns down, and the congregation come together in a much more passionate way to clear up the mess from their burnt church. And the kids do what they always do and just start playing. And right in the midst of it, the narrator's father, because he's remembering when he was a child, appears with some biscuits that the mother has cooked for them, and all covered in ash and soot from the burnt church. He pushes the cart out of the way that they're playing under, and he gives his son a biscuit. And he says in the book, I ask you, was this not communion? And I can remember thinking that's one of the most beautiful definitions of those holy moments that we seek in the everyday. And it also made me think of one. As Simon said, I've done lots of different chaplaincy work. I did 9 years as chaplain of a drug and alcohol rehab, 13 years with the police, and then the university concurrently. And there was an occasion where we went to a really very, very grisly dead body, and this chap had been there for 3 months. And it doesn't sound like a humorous occasion, but it actually was initially, when I spoke to the woman next door, and she said, I'm worried about old Mr. Fleetwood next door. And I said, oh, when? She said, he always waves from his window. I said, when did you last see him? And she said, oh, March. And this was kind of, a long time before, about 3 months before. So he was as dead as a dead dodo. And we went in there, and one of the sergeants, because it was packed with police while we made sure there was no foul play and had to try to turn over what was left of this poor chap. And one of the sergeants suddenly said to me, how can you possibly believe in God when you see something like that? And just in that moment, she expressed her understanding that that was all she had in store, that this corruption and decay was where she and everyone was heading. And why am I an idiot prancing around talking about God? And I crouched down next to this chap and said, look, this is the car, but the driver has long since gone. And it sounds like such an obvious thing. I mean, in a Baptist church that would get a yawn and someone would throw a piece of fruit at you. But she'd never thought of it. She'd been an officer for about 16 or 17 years, and she must have gone to half a dozen bodies a week. And every single one, she thought the same thing. That's where I'm going. And as we conversed, half a dozen other officers gathered round, and crouching next to this dead body, I was able to share the good news with all of them. And you just think exactly that moment. I think Simon and Ed, you hit the nail on the head. It's just, you suddenly realise God's placed you in a something for that. But to teach and intentionally empower the congregation to do it is so essential. But Simon, I echo what Graham said. This has been brilliant. It's been a real journey, and I've loved every second of it. Some really, really wise words. Nigel, I loved those quotes that you were putting in from that you've gathered from where you've gathered them. But absolutely marvelous. I think this needs to be interwoven with teaching, and I need it. I've got, the conference was worth the asking price for this alone. So,
Hey.
But thank you so much. It's been marvelous, absolutely marvelous.
James, what I love about what you said is that it just reminds me of the proximity and presence. Actually, to not underestimate the moments that we can have by just being in the moment, wherever that is. So obviously you were a chaplain working with the police, but for me, I'm just a dad at school to a lot of parents. But actually, there's a present. I'm present there, to be present there, to look for those moments that you can just. And so, like for us, one of those silly kind of presence moments was crossing the road at the bottom of the bottom of the road where we cross over, which is quite busy. Sometimes cars don't stop. They see kids crossing and parents and stuff, and they're just rude and horrible. So a couple of the mums that we're with, I live on a housing estate. They get quite vocal, quite aggressive very quickly. Some words come out of their mouth, no matter what kids are around. But what they noticed about the way that, particularly my wife, but also I was there for one of the occasions, is that we didn't respond in an angry, aggressive way. And we just had the conversation that just came out about the peace that we try to carry, which is ironic because we've got 4 kids and our house is not always very peaceful. But they saw something that was peaceful. They saw something that they were like, I want to be a bit more like that. And out of that conversation, we've been able to have other conversations. But it was just this kind of silly moment. But presence, I think, in terms of mission is really helpful. And actually, if we can teach people just some of that, it's just really simple, but just by being present in those moments and then looking for those opportunities where you can just get to share something, just helps to then build on that. Longevity is key too, I think, though.
And it makes me chuckle because, in these conversations, you're kind of also chatting to God as you're chatting to everyone.
Yeah.
The Lord knows how I would respond if someone nearly hit my kids with a car and then swore.
Oh yeah, it wasn't quite.
Trying to bite an ear off.
Yeah, it wasn't quite that bad either. So
Mike Tyson on them.
Yeah, there was a little bit of an overreaction.
That one. I felt God just say, like, don't worry, I wouldn't get you to do that one.
No, and to be fair, it wasn't quite as bad as they were making out, the mums. They were just annoyed that the car was going a bit quick. But anyway, there you go.
Well, good for you for demonstrating it, Ed. I'd have been all for.
Yeah, I mean, like my wife said, that wasn't great the way that car responded, but shouting at them's not going to help either, because by the time you're shouting at them, they're halfway down the road and they can't hear you anyway. So it doesn't achieve anything, just gets you wound up. So anyway, but out of that, we've been able to have conversations about peace, and one of the mums particularly suffers with anxiety. So again, she often wants to bring up the topic of peace, even though she's totally anti-God, doesn't really want to know, but she's really keen to talk about having peace. So yeah, we just keep praying for her. But yeah.
I think our time is up. I've put in the chat. Ed, is that we should have finished at past? I think.
Yeah, but
yeah.
So everyone's still here. No one's left yet.
No. So I've put in the chat box. So the group with the number is a Baptist multi-congregational Facebook group where churches that are exploring the multi-congregational journey. So that's the 3121 number. Then the other 2 are related to the APEST stuff. I've been so one of those is the bit.ly link is a form to fill in if you're interested in being part of the cohort or just getting more information about the cohort that's running to develop equipping in APEST. And then the other one is for a Facebook group where we talk about things APEST within the Baptist family. So that's that. Let me. Can I pray for you guys? If you're happy to draw it to a close. If I draw it to a formal close, and if anyone wants to stick around and chat a bit more, then we can do that. But Father, we want to thank you for our time together. Thank you for who you are. Thank you that you are a God of mission, a God who desires to share his love for this world of which we're a part. And we thank you that you invite us to participate in that. Lord, help us as church to have that as our focus, to throw away everything that hinders us in the task of joining you in your mission and being the people that follow exactly where you lead. Lord, help us to be people who bring glory to your name and equip us in our tasks of ministry and missionary prayer. In that name, for your glory. Amen.
Yes. Amen.